Okay, hi class. In this chapter, we will be looking at high and low context cultures, the differences between the two, and what it means to you as a communicator. Perception, how perception comes into play, cultural perception when you're communicating. And lastly, we will be looking at Chen's communication competence, the 4 areas of communication that Chen has researched. Okay, so looking at high versus low context cultures. To give you some background, this is based on the research of Edward T. Hall. He published The Silent Language in 1959. But then in 1976, he focused his attention on the communication of high context and low context cultures. So to first give you some background, we live in the United States, a low context culture. Other countries such as Switzerland, Germany, Nordic states, they're considered low context cultures. High context cultures include China, Japan, Korea, American Indian, most Latin American cultures. You know, there's a degree of high and low context cultures, or I should say a continuum of the context that's taking place in each of these cultures, but for the most part, those countries, one would fall in low and one would fall in high. So what is low context culture and what is high? So low context cultures, okay, elaborate verbal messages. A message is encoded in an explicit, straightforward code. We say what we mean to say. Our message is clear. We use, and I say we because we live in a low context culture, but in low context cultures, in a sense, verbal messages are very elaborate and highly specific, detailed and redundant, and verbal abilities are highly valued. So again, low context, encoded, the message is encoded. Remember where encoding is, in a straightforward way. The messages, the verbal messages are elaborate, highly specific, detailed, redundant, highly valued verbal abilities. In high context cultures, cultures in which less has to be said, meaning is in the physical environment. And I say customs as well, like there's an understanding based on this culture's custom. Again, in high context, less is said or written, as more of the meaning is in the physical environment. Okay, you go into a Japanese tea ceremony, and the meaning, the understanding is in the physical environment or shared, by the people within that culture. I have a nice video that I clip that shows the differences of high and low context cultures in this particular module. A very important concept that you do need to know for this class, but be aware of the differences. Okay, so next we're looking at perception and how perception comes into play as we're communicating interculturally. Human perception, and perhaps you've learned this in another communication class or even your psychology class, is thought of as a 3-step process. And each of these 3 steps is affected by culture, by your culture. The 3-step process that we're going to look at of how we, in a sense, decode information or what we see or make meaning out of a person or what is said or an organization is based on selection, organization, and interpretation. This takes place in a split second in our minds. We don't even know we are doing this. We're perceiving this perception is taking place. So looking at this first section of selecting. Okay, so we have so much stimuli coming at us. Think about that when you are walking on campus or you're walking into a store. There's so much stimuli that's taking place. What do you pay attention to? What do you select out of that stimuli? and in a sense make a perception based on it. So selection, stimuli is perceived by our retinas. Okay, that's in our eyes. In a sense, we don't even know that we are seeing this. The retinas, it's an unconscious selection process. We can't even examine the mental process of this taking place. So in a sense, the selection, a nanosecond of what the stimuli that we're perceiving, the stimuli that comes into our mind. To make a little more sense out of this, research was done by Simons and Chabris in 1999. And what they did was they had a basketball game going on, and they had a person dress up in a gorilla suit who walked out into the basketball game. And no one noticed the gorilla. No one could say that that gorilla was there because their mind, their retinas were not focused on that particular gorilla walking out there. The selection process did not take place. It's the same thing. Think about when you were in an airport and there's so much stimuli going on and there's so many announcements and you don't pay attention. You don't pick up, you don't select this particular stimuli until perhaps your name is announced over the loudspeaker in an airport, in a busy, you pick up that stimuli. So it's based on your culture, based on that you recognize your name, you recognize that that is important. So selection, the selection process, again, quick, very fast, that takes place when we are going through the perception of the process of perception. Organization, our second process. Okay, how do we group this information in our minds? Okay, so first we select all the stimuli, or we select the stimuli, it's in our brain, and then we organize it. And we usually organize it in a sense of something that we are familiar with. We group objects or things together. What are we familiar with in our culture? What do we group together? Based on our experiences in our life, based in our culture, based on our families, what we are familiar with, we kind of apply that to an organization or a grouping in our mind. So we gather the stimuli, we organize it in our mind, and then lastly, we make an interpretation. And in this interpretation, okay, this is where we create meaning. This is where we say, oh, okay, this means. So going back to the airport, we're waiting for our flight. You're people watching, and you see people walking back and forth in front of you. You see a man with a big cowboy hat on, cowboy boots, Wrangler jeans, and immediately you say, oh, he must be a cowboy. And you may even say he's a cowboy from Texas. So this perception that just took place, the stimuli that you pulled out of the way he's dressed, of the organization in your mind based on your culture, based on what you have read or that you know of what a cowboy is, you organize that in your mind of the way he's dressed. And then the meaning, the interpretation is, oh, he's a cowboy. So that the interpretation is the decoding process. You apply meaning to it, and sometimes we may verbalize that, we may not. In a sense, we make judgments, based on our culture, and these cues are culturally informed. So what you have experienced in your life, perception. Selection, organization, and interpretation. Okay, so lastly, I'd like to look at from this particular chapter is Chen's intercultural competence. And what do we mean by intercultural communication competence? That, when we attempt to communicate with someone, we should set goals, in a sense, for this interaction. What do you want to accomplish? What message do you intend for the receiver to understand, to interpret? So in order to be competent and in order to be effective, Chen and his research that he conducted looked at 4 areas in which we need to be competent in order to be successful. And what he looked at is first personality strength, secondly communication skills, thirdly psychological adjustment, and fourth is cultural awareness. So let's look at the first one as far as personality strength. Personality strength looks at the ability to effectively and obviously appropriately communicate with people of other cultures. So the strength comes in these 4 areas of your personality. Your self-concept. How do you view yourself in a positive manner as what type of person? What is your self-concept? How do you self-disclose? And as you know, self-disclosure is your willingness to share with another person something that he or she does not know about you, that's not public. So how much and how do you self-disclose to this other person? You monitor yourself. In a sense, you conduct social comparison. You compare yourself and you modify your self-presentation, your expressiveness in that particular area. So you monitor yourself based on the comparison of others in that area, or the social situation, the context. And lastly is social relaxation, personality strength. You know, do you have a lot of anxiety or very little anxiety when you are put into that particular social anxiety or social situation? And how does this, in a sense, is it communicated? Are you relaxed? Are you at ease in that social area? So personality strength is the first area in order to be competent. Secondly, obviously, you know, communication skills, competence in both verbal and nonverbal behavior, to think about your message skills, the importance of your social skills, empathy and identity and maintenance. There's actually 4 areas that he identified in communication skills. So Chen identified 4 areas in communication skills. One is obviously your message skills. And your message skills include, you know, your use of language and understanding feedback, behavioral flexibility. Behavioral flexibility is your communication skills. So in a sense, you have the appropriate behavior in a diverse context, is being able to be flexible with that particular behavior. Interaction management is the 4th in communication skills. And obviously that would be being other oriented, thinking about the other person to whom you're speaking to, the audience, and in a sense, interacting or managing your interaction. And then lastly, in a sense, is your social skills, which include empathy and identity maintenance. So in your chapter, in your textbook, you see these 4 areas of communication skills, which include message skills, behavioral flexibility, interaction management, and social skills. This could be a test question. I don't know, but keep that in mind of communication skills of Chen. Okay, so that's our second one. Our third area in which Chen looked at is psychological adjustment. You're competent. A competent intercultural communicator, you must be able to become familiar in a new environment. You need to be able to, in a sense, become comfortable. You need to handle the culture shock that takes place so that it's not frustrating or stressful, or you don't alienate yourself in this new environment. So psychological, the psyche of your mind, and you need to adjust to this culture, and you don't want to, in a sense, have culture shock. You want to be able to channel it appropriate. And the last competence is cultural awareness, and this is understanding the social system and the behaviors of that host culture, and to be sensitive to these particular systems. That's it for the chapter. Have a good day.